Hello and welcome back to a new installment of the weekly album spotlight, where I talk about albums and artists that I'm interested in discussing at the moment in time. This is episode 9. I'm not really sure why I feel the need to do that introduction, but today I'm going to be talking about Del the Funky Homosapien and his 1991 debut album, I Wish My Brother George Was Here.
Mr. Dabalina, Mr. Bob Dabalina, Mr. Bob Dabalina wants to quit. You really make me sick with your fraudulent behavior. You're gonna make me flip and then an army couldn't.
Del is a fascinating artist because he's someone who has had a long and storied career. You know, he did some work on Ice Cube's first album. He's collaborated with all kinds of people. You know, he did the Deltron album with Dan the Automator, and I forget who the other member of that group was. Long and the short of it, he's been around, he's done a lot of stuff, he's always sort of been somebody to check out. And yet, the extent of most people's knowledge of him is pretty much limited to the fact that he was the featured guest rapper on the first Gorillaz album.
Finally, someone let me out of my cage. Now, time for me is nothing cause I'm counting no A's.
Although now that I think of it, I'm pretty sure he did have another hit around that same time frame, 19 to 20 years ago. Although I don't really think it's endured in the cultural consciousness to anywhere near the extent that Clint Eastwood has. Anyway, put all of that out of your mind, because I Wish My Brother George Was Here is a very different album. It's a somewhat different Del. It's not the same Del, but it's not as different of a Del as you might think. So this is his debut. It was produced by Ice Cube, who is his cousin. And as you'd imagine, it has that West Coast sound. Like, I don't know whether I would call it gangsta rap, because it's not on this album. Is not a gangsta album, because Del is not a gangsta, and to his credit, I think he understood that it really would not work if he tried to pretend to be that, which is more than can be said for certain other hip-hop artists of the 1990s. MC Hammer. So it's this really interesting blend of an album that, the production is very much that West Coast thing. If you like Dr. Dre, Ice Cube's contemporary stuff, the what eventually became G-Funk, you'll probably dig the production on this album, and I do, because I for me it's kind of a thing where it's like, I dig P-Funk, so I dig G-Funk, I just enjoy funk music, You'll probably like the production style, but that makes it extremely different from anything else that Del ever really did. He's always continued to do stuff with the funk, as you would imagine, considering that it's literally in his name. But this is definitely the closest he's ever gone in his solo career to just openly courting the mainstream. And I mean, it worked for him. It paid dividends in that it was successful enough to get him another album on the label, and to get him a following that, as I said in the intro, has endured to this day. But it's deeply, deeply uncharacteristic of his sound in a way that I'm pretty sure Del himself was not super happy with. I've seen interviews with him where he says more or less that Ice Cube pushed him into this direction, and that the reason he'd never worked with Ice Cube again is that he wanted to be making more indie, less commercial stuff. And I think, for better or worse, that's just where he's at. He's an indie rapper. That's been his identity. This is a man who's had like 4 different opportunities to be a star, and he's turned down each and every one of them. And I've got to respect that. Inevitably, whenever I talk about hip-hop, it always seems like I wind up sort of dancing in circles around the rapping itself. I do kind of the same thing with jazz. Because I kind of had the same problem with both genres, is that I don't necessarily have the vocabulary that you need to be a good jazz critic or a good hip-hop critic. My musical vocabulary is mostly, unfortunately, in terms of rock music. So even though I love both genres, I'm not super well equipped to talk about them, and I think that shows when I do, because I just wind up sort of talking about the beats, because that's kind of where my ear goes, to tell you the truth. But I will say that Del is one of my favorite MCs, because he just has, I mean, he just has such a goofy charisma that he just rolls with, and he'll say things that where you almost feel like if somebody else said this it would be corny, but he makes it work somehow, and he has such a laid back, easy flow, which I think fits the vibe he eventually chose to go with really well, of the sort of goofy stoner skater guy. There's hints of that on this album. That flow is already in place, and the goofy stoner thing is absolutely in place. That's arguably the central unifying factor of the album, particularly when you get to the second half. But the rest of it isn't quite there yet. And that's what makes this such a unique listening experience, particularly if you come into it familiar with Del's other stuff. I wasn't. About a year ago, I said, I'm going to pick up a bunch of Del albums. I've been enjoying this guy in Gorillaz for ages. I want to know what his stuff sounds like. Eventually, I wound up with this, No Need for Alarm, and the Deltron albums, and I've heard most of his other stuff. I'm rambling a bit here, but back to this album. It's really, really good. It's one of those difficult cases where, like I said, it's not very characteristic of him, it's not typical of him, but it's really a very strong debut. And I would definitely recommend you listening to it. It's very funky. If your thing is hip-hop and funk, this is definitely an album for you to check out. And it really leans into the goofier side of the funk thing, and more specifically the P-funk thing. I mean, George Clinton's on a track, I'm pretty sure. Half of these songs just about are made up of P-funk samples. Like, there's a Funkadelic sample. They sample Glory Hella Stupid like 5 or 6 times. The opening track is built entirely around a sample from P-Funk All-Stars track. There are a few relatively weak tracks. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of Same Old Thing, which is not a bad track, it just gets a little too long. Or Dark Skin Girls, which, again, is not a bad track at all. It's very clumsy about what it's trying to say. And that track is really, I think, where he kind of is showing his youthful inexperience. Because the content is not bad, but something about the way he presents it and his delivery just kind of brings it down, It's definitely, those 2 tracks are the only real weak spots on the album for me. Something I like here is the diversity. A problem I do have with some of Del's later stuff is that, like, once you get to No Need for Alarm, and he reinvents himself, and he becomes what he basically is now, he settles into this mode where it's like, you'll have goofy tracks, but then, like, the other 2/3 of the album, it's just battle rap all day, every day. That's what it is. You buy a Del album, it's because you want to hear some really well-done battle rap. To the point where, like, the whole concept of the Deltron album is a 30th century battle rapper going up against a totalitarian government, or something like that. It's been a minute. On this, you have, like, a pretty even distribution of, like, half of it's battle rap, half of it's jokey, weird songs that have comedy on them, like The Wacky World of Rapid Transit. I love that. Dr. Bombay, Sleeping on My Couch, which is just one of the greatest hip-hop tracks of the 90s to me. And then even like Hoods Come in Dozens, like that's a serious song in a sense, but the way it's presented is really comedic. And I love that he ends the album kind of on a joke at his own expense. Like, you have some dialogue with Ice Cube and somebody else where Ice Cube's saying like, hey, yeah, I'm trying to get him to do some of this gangsta stuff, but he's not about that. And it just kind of ends that way, and I think it's a fun ending for the album. And yeah, that's about all I have to say about the album. I definitely would recommend it pretty highly. You know, I would say listen to a smattering of other tracks from throughout his career, get a sense of what he's about, and then dive into either this, No Need for Alarm, or, you know, Both Sides of the Brain, or Deltron, or Gate 13. You know, that's definitely an album I would advise you to check out too. The thing about Del is that he's always stayed sort of the same. Like, he evolves to a degree, but like there are no real curveballs in his career, and he's stayed pretty defiantly true to what he originally set out as, which is probably part of the reason he's not found vast amounts of success. You know, hip-hop is a genre where, you know, you sit down for like a month and hip-hop's going to pass you by, or at least that's how it was in the 90s and the 2000s. I think it's kind of slowed down a bit in recent years, considering that trap has been the dominant thing for 3 or 4 years now. But anyway, I will see you all later on, and I know you are all extremely anxious and looking forward to the next episode of Extremely White Man Talks About Hip Hop. But until that day, I will be giving you more weekly album spotlights and hopefully some more edited reviews in the coming weeks and days. You know, I say that even though like all my videos are edited. Like, this video is gonna have like 30 edits and jump cuts. You know, I ramble, and I stutter, and an authentic video of mine would be like 3 hours long, and it would be it would all be just like uhs and buts and me like mispronouncing words, and it would be terrible. Nobody would want to watch it. But yeah, I will see you guys later.